Can you speak to contemporary hiring processes from wherever that matters, or is relevant for you? Like Ali spoke about it from faculty hiring processes. Zeb talked about she actually doesn't hire that much directly, but she's often referring people and she's always asked for like new people to bring into the industry. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, as you suggested, I'm much more familiar with academic hiring. And in the 30 odd years that I have been in academia, I have sat on many, many, many search committees, ranging from people in because I might have served in communication departments or radio, TV, film department. But when it comes to film and television hiring, um, some of the changes that I'm seeing is in the in the field of film studies, you have a small number of positions and you have an inordinate number of people out there applying for those. So there are PhDs who are, I mean, the volume of people that have PhDs who are looking for film studies jobs that are few and far between is daunting. Um, Couple of things about live television versus television, which is single camera. And we are seeing this big shift right now where live television is on the outs. Very few things are getting done. It's all live. It's about events, about sports, about the news. So there's a residual number of things that are now remaining in the live arena. And when you are hiring somebody, we have in our program, we came out of a very studio. We had the biggest non-commercial soundstage in Long Island. We were the site of a lot of soap operas that were getting produced. We would often rent our facilities to PBS to do, talk shows and so on. And over time, we saw that the value of that diminished to the point where students were looking for more single camera, more drama, more script writing experience. And I think it's a reflection of how the streaming networks and the whole change in the model of cable and broadcast to streaming impacted the number of opportunities for single camera scripted kind of television shows. Um, when we tried to hire for narratives in television, one of my experiences was the lines between people that were doing work in television who were former cinema or independent filmmakers or scriptwriters for film who are now looking to television as just another way of telling a story episodically or serially. It was interesting because there was no such thing as a television graduate that you wanted to hire for television jobs. And there were cinematographers who could teach. There were people who were editors who could teach in either. There were producers who were working in both industries. And it made it really difficult, especially in streaming, where if you went out looking for somebody in narrative television, it was very hard to find someone who could teach narrative television because they were out being hired by the industry. And most of the television folks who had studied television in universities and their MFA programs had come from either documentary backgrounds or they had done live TV. So it was, we're at this, interesting inflection point where the industry changes haven't percolated quite to the academia in MFA programs and so on. So we have far fewer programs that recognize this shift that converges television and cinema to the point of streaming narratives. And I think we see that a lot, that discussion is ongoing. And that was really challenging when we tried to hire somebody for narrative television, episodic narrative television. Um, I think for documentaries, you get a far easier way of the pool of candidates is far bigger. There are many, many more documentary programs in MFA, but MFA programs historically have either focused on documentary or narrative cinema. This new breed of episodic, it was never a thing in storytelling that was taught at the college level. So I think that's one challenge that we find. Um, in post-production, we have never had a problem hiring people because in post, you're looking for somebody that is either a seasoned editor who has done their work. And when we hired the person who leads our post strand right now, he came off of having worked as a lead editor for a major post-production house in New York City in the days that you used to have post houses. Um, and when in the 90s, when Final Cut Pro and Avid came out, and people started buying their own computers, they shut down, and he was a great find at that time. Um, but I think the hardest hires for us right now are in narrative television, because it's a very interesting time period, which you don't see the talent out there as much as you do in doc and filmmaking. Yeah.
Yeah, and that people who work in the industry and people who teach, it's not always, they don't always mix the same way that.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to add is that there's I'm also somebody who has invested a lot of time in new media, the so-called new media world, which is interactive storytelling, virtual reality, augmented reality. And I think, again, when you start to hire in those fields, it's very difficult to find people with a track record who are willing to go to academia at the time when the industry demand is just so much more compelling. So that's another challenge in academia, is when you float new programs, finding the right people for them in emerging technologies can be very tricky. I think, for me personally, the interesting growth in in narrative techniques is not going to happen as much in what we call legacy media as it might in these very new plastic ways of storytelling that live on multiple devices, that may have a counterpart in the legacy world, but they're doing more with it. They might be adding to it, might be extending the narrative. I'm very drawn to the idea of a living story where documentaries can, don't just have to be finished and then shipped and then you're done with it, but something that actually can be added, something can complement, something that can be sort of a living history idea. And it's not easy to do that in the legacy media world. But these new ways of storytelling are certainly allowing for shorter but much more impactful ways in which stories can be told. But again, when it comes to hiring for those positions, yeah, I mean, you're looking at a very challenging landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, and the short form in all that episodic, we still really haven't found a commercial place for short form media, except for like social media ads and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Gaming is one place where a lot of people who have that skill set, they get hired for game design, because that's actually a revenue making part of the industry. But in our field, in documentary or narrative, there's not much, because devices like headsets and so on have not found the kind of distribution, and frankly, people's ability to get access to projects through platforms, the equivalent of Netflix, if you may, for VR and AR, hasn't come about. They're out there, the Oculus Studio or Steam and so on, but they don't rival the ease with which people are able to access content. And until we get to that point, you won't see the growth that these media, in my view, deserve.